Welcome everyone to the Wednesday morning series. It's special edition today is Chelsey Brooke Cole. She wrote a book called If Only I'd Known. And we were discussing before I hit record that, gosh, how many times have we heard that? And she said that's where this came from. As you can see by the screen, Chelsey has many credentials and has wisdom on this topic. I had met with her, and when I was talking, I was like, "Oh, you have to come on and join us in the webinar series." So she graciously agreed to do so. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chelsey.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Very excited to be here and do this workshop with you guys. I know this is such a nuanced topic and one that I don't think we talk about enough, but I know people are struggling with. So, very excited to do this and answer any questions. So, my goal is to do about 30, 40 minutes or so of content and then have, of course, 15, 20 minutes or so for Q&A. It's hard to pare down the information because there's a lot I could cover on this topic. But I'll just share a bit about me quickly so you know who's talking to you, and then we'll get right into what we're going to be covering today. So, I'm a licensed psychotherapist and certified partner trauma therapist. So, a lot of times in the sex addiction recovery process, I'm working with the betrayed partner. And specifically, I specialize in narcissistic abuse and complex trauma. That covers, of course, betrayal trauma, relational trauma, early childhood trauma, all those things. For me, I've been dealing with narcissistic abuse all my life, but didn't know it. I often say that I've been prepared to do this work all my life, but didn't realize it. I've had relationships with several different types of narcissists, continue to have to deal with them. So I tell my clients, like, I am right there with you, experiencing this. I have been a betrayed partner of a sex addict as well, or narcissistic sex addict. So, I'm very familiar with what this process is like. And then, as she was sharing, I wrote a best-selling book as well where I collected over 400 stories from survivors to include. So I was really excited to be able to put so many survivor stories in the book because I know that dealing with narcissists, whether they have a sex or porn addiction or they don't, which many do, um, it's just so validating to be able to read and see in a book like you are not alone, you're not crazy. So many people are going through this and get this. Why I do this personally, as I said, I have personal experience with this. I think narcissistic abuse is really often misunderstood, and the unique experiences in particular of betrayed partners with narcissists is really misunderstood. And I'm really passionate about advocating for awareness and change. And the only way change happens is if we understand what we're really dealing with and how these experiences are different and nuanced. So what we're going to be covering today, I always like to start first with how prevalent is narcissism because it's talked about so much, but that doesn't mean we're necessarily talking about it in the right way. So I will share with you some statistics on what we're really dealing with. What is narcissism and NPD? Because it's important to know what we're talking about and what we're covering. How do narcissists in particular react to the recovery process? How do narcissists engage with? How do they feel? How do they often treat the betrayed partner? Definitely want to get into that. And one of the things we'll kind of hone in on there is how addicts and narcissists will, or narcissistic addicts will gaslight a lot. And so I wanted to touch on that specifically because it's also another one of those buzzwords that's overused so it can be misused. And so I wanted to bring some clarity there. And then how do you advocate for yourself? How do you explain your experiences to a therapist if they don't understand narcissism? If you are lucky, you're able to find a therapist who specializes in narcissistic abuse, but that's just really still a growing field. And so I want to give you some insights and tips for what to do if you're already with a therapist or you're looking for one and you want to know how to explain your experiences and not sound crazy or not be dismissed. So, just a few disclaimers. I'll be using the terms like sex porn addiction, compulsive sexual behaviors. I know there's some debate around language, but just for the sake of clarity, you'll hear me use those interchangeably. I'll say narcissistic sex addict when I'm referring to somebody who has a core personality style of narcissism and they have a sex or porn addiction or engage in compulsive sexual behaviors, and a non narcissistic sex addict for those who have those compulsive behaviors but don't have the core personality trait of narcissism. I am generalizing here to focus on male narcissistic sex addicts and female betrayed partners. although there certainly can be female sex addicts and male betrayed partners. It's just more of a nuanced conversation than we have time for today. And my goal isn't to dive into the whole narcissism NPD debate because I know we could get into that as well. I will talk about the traits of a narcissist and happy to answer specific questions about that at the end. So my goal really is to illuminate a side of things that just isn't talked about as much during the recovery process. I often think of and describe narcissism as a silent killer of progress and building genuine intimacy. It can make you, as the betrayed partner, and even the therapist working with the narcissistic sex addict, it can make you work twice as hard just without getting anywhere. Dealing with a narcissist is often like trying to fight a ghost, like being in a relationship with them, dealing with them in a recovery process. It's like there's a ghost in the room. You know it's there. You know that something is causing damage, but you can't quite put your finger on it. You don't know exactly what it is, and no technique that you're using, no matter what you do, no matter what you try, it's not getting better. And that's exactly how betrayed partners feel. Like I said, a lot of times in general in the relationship, they do all the things. They read the books, they go to therapy, they try the communication strategies, and nothing works. So let's go ahead and dive into how prevalent is narcissism and what exactly are we talking about when we use the term. So I would really like to start with this slide because so many survivors, as I said, feel so alone. You might have thoughts like, who else would even believe what I'm going through? Even if I told them, would they believe me? Am I crazy? Am I the only person who's experiencing this? That's why I like to start with this slide. One, because survivors often do feel alone, and I want you to know that you're not. And two, because narcissism is talked about so much these days that sometimes when we say the term, people just kind of roll their eyes or like diminish it or not take it seriously. And that just feels like another way that you're being victimized or gaslighted or misunderstood. The overuse and misuse of mental health concepts like narcissism, like gaslighting, is honestly a real slap in the face to real survivors because if, quote, everyone is a narcissist to some degree, then no one is a victim to it, which is really damaging to the true survivors. So you can keep these statistics in mind the next time that somebody says you're being overdramatic or you just personally start to feel alone in what you're experiencing. So the US has a current population of 330 million people. NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is estimated to be at a prevalence rate of about 6%. So that means about 20 million people would meet criteria for NPD in the US. So let's just consider that those 20 million narcissists negatively impact 5 other people throughout their lifetime. Very conservative estimate, obviously. That means there would literally be 99 million narcissistic abuse survivors in the US alone. So to say that narcissistic abuse is affecting literally millions and millions of people is not overdramatic. In fact, it's underestimating. Like there's literally millions of people all over the world experiencing this. So never let somebody tell you that this whole narcissism thing has just been blown out of proportion when it is clearly an epidemic. And you don't even have to be diagnosed. Somebody doesn't have to be diagnosed with NPD to cause damage. And that is because narcissism is a personality trait that exists on a spectrum. Go ahead and get over to that. Okay. So narcissism is really an umbrella term for the behaviors and symptoms that you see on this slide. So we're talking about things like they're very entitled. They have this excessive need for admiration. They can be charming. They can be quite charismatic. There's a lack of empathy. There's an inflated sense of self-importance. What they want, what they need takes precedence. They're very interpersonally exploitative. They see relationships as transactions. I get what I want. They stay surface level. They stay superficial. It's really hard to feel like you can have a really meaningful relationship like that has depth with a narcissist. Very validation seeking, but at the same time that there's that charm and that grandiosity, they're very hypersensitive to criticism. They have a very victimized mindset. If you ever tried to talk to a narcissist about something that's not going well in the relationship, very defensive, very easily, it comes right back at you. It's the blame shifting, it's projection. No, you're doing this, that's you. So it's really important that we understand that calling somebody a narcissist is a descriptive term. It's not a diagnosis. It is like saying somebody is agreeable or conscientious or extroverted. And since narcissism, like any personality trait, exists on a spectrum, someone can be a little narcissistic to highly narcissistic. So, on the low end of the scale, kind of think of the entitled know it all at the dinner party. They might be great for hosting parties, but they're very superficial. They lack empathy. You have very surface level conversations. You might kind of keep that person on a like on the outside of your circle. You might call them to have fun, but you're not going to call them when you really need empathy and you really need somebody to be there for you. Now, we can all go up to the high end of the scale where we have malignant narcissism. This person is sadistic, they're vengeful, they're manipulative. You're actually kind of scared of that person because you're not sure how far they're going to go to hurt you, to dominate you, to get their way. So, to say somebody is a narcissist, we would expect them to display most of the traits here most of the time and consistently over time. That's how we really know that somebody's a narcissist. They have these patterns. So, if you've ever heard people talk about it's like narcissists have their own playbook, yeah, that's because they act so similar across the board in different relationships. It's pervasive, it's not just in one space, and it's happening consistently. So when you hear the term narcissist, a lot of the times we're thinking of the grandiose type. We're thinking of the person who's charming and charismatic, can be kind of arrogant and selfish, but at the same time, because of their charm, they tend to be quite likable. They tend to be very successful. But narcissism doesn't just include the grandiose side. So narcissism as a personality construct includes both the grandiose and the vulnerable traits. So you need to think of it like a coin. On the one side is the grandiose side, on the other side is the vulnerable side. And sometimes which one you see that day, it feels as random as a coin toss. But any narcissist will display at different times grandiose and vulnerable traits. That fluctuation of whether they're more grandiose that day or whether they seem more victimized and vulnerable mainly has to do with their level of narcissistic supply. You might have heard that talked about before. But narcissistic supply is the narcissist version of self esteem. It's how they try to regulate their emotions, it's how they try to build their ego. And supply is essentially the attention, the validation, admiration, the praise that they get. So when life is going their way, they just got the promotion, somebody just flirted with them, then they can look more grandiose. When they feel that they're not getting the amount of attention they deserve, their supply is low, life isn't going their way, somebody else got the job, not them, they're going to look more vulnerable. But the number one trait, the number one core trait across the board when we're talking about a narcissist is they're entitled. It is at the center of everything a narcissist does and who they are. They believe they deserve special treatment, not because they've done anything. They don't feel like they should have to earn anything simply because they exist. They believe that the rules don't apply to them. They apply to you, but they don't apply to them. They're always the exception to the rule. So they shouldn't have to follow rules like other people. And this is often what keeps the relationship very out of balance. And you wonder, like, if you've ever had the thought of who thinks like that? Like, who does that? Do they really think that that's okay? You are likely witnessing their entitlement. Now, with that kind of person in mind, how does a narcissist react to the recovery process? So, I'll talk first about just the ways they exploit this process and then how they respond to it generally. And by exploit, I mean how they really use therapy, the support groups, all the things that they should be using to for genuine healing. Instead, they twist it and they use it for their own personal gain. The first and most striking way that they do this is by using the whole recovery process as a source of supply. Remember, supply being the excessive amount of attention, praise, validation, admiration that a narcissist feels entitled to. Supply is the narcissist version of self esteem. It's how they regulate their emotions, maintain their grandiose or innocent sense of self. It's what they're always seeking, never getting enough of. It's like if you're pouring water into a cup with a hole in the bottom. They're not building genuine self esteem based on their words and actions matching and living in alignment with their values, like where you could actually build something solid. They just constantly have to have more and more and more. They're trying to pour into a cup that's a hole in the bottom. So that's why they always have to have more and more supply. So for narcissists, they don't have to be a good person or necessarily do good things to feel good about themselves. They just have to look good because what they think of themselves is the reflection of what they're getting back from others. As long as they're being perceived in the way they want to be perceived, then they can be good. And that's where the problem really shows up in recovery because the narcissist might actually be quite good at looking like they're doing all the things. They're going to therapy, they're participating in the support groups, but all of that is fueled by their desire for supply. It's that external validation. It has to do with how they're going to be seen by others, what others are going to think of them and what they're doing. Many narcissists will even exploit the recovery process by making it their own overcomer story. So they'll openly talk about what they did and how they supposedly overcame it. I say supposedly because a lot of narcissists just get better at hiding their addiction as opposed to really healing it. But that can be really confusing for people on the outside because you think, well, they must mean it, like they must be genuine because no narcissist would admit to doing those things. I mean, they'd be way too arrogant for that. That's why it's so important to know that narcissism exists on the vulnerable side as well, because narcissists will use things that might otherwise seem embarrassing, something you want to hide or not share about, because they don't experience shame like other people. So I once asked a narcissistic sex addict, "What does shame mean to you?" Because he kept using it in a way that just did not make sense to me. And he said, "Shame is when other people know what I did and think bad of me, but I don't really think I'm that bad." So it wasn't an internal experience of I did something bad and I feel shame about that. It was what other people were going to think. So if other people are praising the narcissist for being brave and open and honest about sharing their story, that just gives them supply. They're detached from the feeling that they did something bad. As long as other people aren't negatively judging them for that, they're good. They really only care about consequences, not what they actually did. So if the consequences for their acting out behaviors aren't that bad, like they find out that people really don't treat them that differently, no one really cares that they watched porn, and they can spin that so that people will actually praise them for telling their story, that's a win-win to them. They also tend to make the recovery process a competition. Narcissists in general view people in a very competitive way. So, especially if they're in a group setting, they'll make comments comparing themselves to others, talking about what they're doing, how impressed their therapist is with how much progress they're making. And then in and out of group sessions, they'll make comments putting down other people's recovery, like, "Phew, did you hear about that new guy? Like, I'm definitely not as bad as him." Or, "Wow, can you believe that? Like, what a tool. Who would do that?" And they seem very disconnected from what they did and how harmful what they did is. Even if they did the exact same thing that that other person that they're criticizing did, that lack of self-reflection, they're not thinking about what they've done, and they're not experiencing shame the same way. And finally, you will see them seeking out leadership roles too soon in their recovery. So maybe they're just a few months in, haven't even fully finished the disclosure process, and they're talking about how they should really be sponsoring somebody already. They're really surpassing their peers in terms of what they know. They kind of got this, like they could be leading this thing by now. Now, how do narcissists react during the recovery process? So they're in it. How are they going to respond to that? They feign remorse, minimize their behaviors. They might attend the support groups and the therapy, but in those sessions and in those spaces, they kind of make light of what they did. They joke about their actions. They really downplay the severity. They really minimize the impact that their behaviors would have on their partner. They might make comments like, "No, it's not my fault. I should always get the girl," or, "When you got it, you got it," kind of suggesting that their behaviors were really just going to happen because they're so desirable. It's not really a serious problem. And they use their addiction as a way to avoid blame and then frame their compulsive sexual behaviors as this uncontrollable addiction to like shirk responsibility. Lots of "I can't help it. What do you want from me? You're making this hard on me. You shouldn't be asking me these things." Lots of, "I can't help it, so you can't hold me accountable," kind of victimized mindset. They don't seem to appreciate the weight of their actions. They're resistant to working on deeper issues. Even in therapy and the support groups, they want to maintain this grandiose or kind of innocent facade, even to the therapist. So how narcissists behave during treatment. Not all narcissists are sex addicts, many are, and there are differences in somebody whose addiction or sexually compulsive behaviors is making them act narcissistically, and somebody who is a narcissist and also has sexually compulsive behaviors. Because if they don't have an underlying narcissistic personality uh, structure, which some do not, then what looks like narcissistic behaviors from that addict will improve with their treatment with addiction. But for somebody who is a narcissist, who has that narcissistic style at their core, their recovery doesn't change their antagonistic behaviors, their entitlement, their validation seeking, their grandiosity. Not only does it not change it, in fact, it can make their narcissistic antagonistic qualities get worse and more obvious, because if they were using the addiction, the acting out as a source of narcissistic supply and validation, then you take that away in treatment, they're going to be more irritable and more difficult because essentially you took away part of what they were using to try to feed their ego. There is a correlation between narcissism and sex addiction or porn addiction, as antagonistic narcissism, which includes those traits of they're entitled, they're exploitative, they're aggressive. That kind of narcissism is linked to self identification as a sex or porn addict. So, individuals high in antagonistic narcissism and that entitlement and that exploitativeness are more prone to shirking responsibility, kind of blaming external factors for their struggles, which suggests that for people who have narcissistic traits and identify as a sex or porn addict, their addiction might be less of like a true compulsive behavior or disorder and more of a narcissistic defense mechanism. So, in other words, they use those acting out behaviors to really avoid personal responsibility for exploitative and aggressive sexual behaviors by framing it as an addiction. So it's really like they just want to act that way. They frame it as an addiction to try to not have to take the blame for it. So if this is the kind of person, if you've got a core personality trait of narcissism and you're seeing those sexually compulsive behaviors, treatment has to prioritize the underlying narcissism, like dealing with their entitlement, their victimhood, their defensiveness, rather than focusing just on these sexual behaviors. Because narcissists might even use their addiction as a way to explain their bad behavior. Like it can be subtle manipulation, but in the relationship, like with the betrayed partner, they'll use it so that whatever the partner says, they're blaming them. So they'll say things like, You're not supporting my healing. You're the reason I can't get better. This is the reason I can't get better because you're always asking me about my recovery, or you're asking me about how things are going. You're making me think of things that are making it harder for me to heal." Or I've known narcissistic sex addicts to say things like, we always are talking about my issues, and that's really making it hard for me to heal. And, you're not perfect either. So I need you to make a list of all the things that you need to improve on, the things that you need to do so we can make sure this is balanced. Or when, as a betrayed partner, you do get upset because you are distressed because they're lying and betraying. And then they kind of step back and they're like, "Oh, I thought you were the healthy one. I thought, you were the one in therapy." So they're using all of these things that they're learning, all the things that they're doing as a way to exploit or manipulate the partner. Narcissists can also weaponize sex during treatment. They might push the partner to do something they're not comfortable with, but frame it in a way of saying, like, if you really care about me and you care about me getting better, then you'll do this. Or, you expect me to not look at porn or not look at other people, but you refuse to have sex with me. And sometimes this is where spiritual abuse can happen too, because they'll say things like, "Well, I have a right to your body. It's biblical." So they'll say, "I have a right to you whenever I want to." And while you're dealing with this in the relationship, sometimes people on the outside who don't know that narcissism is going on, they just think they're dealing with a regular sex addict, like somebody who's not a narcissist. They might even try to make it look reasonable. So the therapist, if they're working with you, perhaps in couples therapy, they might say, "Okay, well, let's talk about how often you guys agree to have sex," without addressing the fact that the narcissist was being highly manipulative and guilt tripping you in that statement. So the way that narcissists behave during treatment is often very resistant to it. They're still trying to control it, and they are basically trying to manipulate it to their advantage. So, how do narcissists look at the betrayed partner? Narcissists see their partners with lots of disdain and contempt because, in their mind, the partner becomes the problem rather than their addiction or rather than their acting out and what they have done. Because in a narcissist's mind, if you have a problem with them, that's your problem. Like, this is how they look at things across the board. That's why you can't ever reason with them, have open conversations with them. Because if you're coming to them with a problem, they say you're looking at it the wrong way, or I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm sorry that's a you problem. They don't see it as a them problem. And they approach treatment the same way, especially if they are going to therapy, going to the support groups, even if they're still lying and betraying and hiding things, their entitlement means that they expect that to be enough for the partner. So once narcissists are in the recovery process, they want quick and immediate results from the partner. They kind of have this mindset, sometimes they say it directly, sometimes they say it subtly, of I said, "I'm sorry, what do you want from me?" Or "I'm in treatment, what do you want from me?" Like they are owed, they feel entitled to their partner's trust just because they admitted what happened, even if they're still hiding some of what happened. So they're very impatient with the betrayed partner's healing process. The narcissist has an attitude of kind of annoyance and disgust, like, can't you get over it? How many times are we going to have to go through this? They'll start downplaying it like it wasn't even that often. It was just sex. It wasn't even a relationship. Or if they're in a support group and they hear somebody else's story, it's like, well, I didn't do as much as so and so. You should really be grateful. Even though they have lots of amends to make, obviously, most of all to the partner. And narcissists hate to be held accountable. They don't value being humble unless they can use it for their own benefit as like a humble brag. But who's going to be most invested in this process, in the narcissist recovery process? Obviously, the betrayed partner is going to be the one who gets the brunt of the outcome. Like whether the narcissist actually invests in treatment or not is going to be really important to the partner, which comes back to why they have so much disdain, why narcissists have so much disdain for the partner, because the partner knows what they did and they want them to take accountability. And the partner knows whether the narcissist is actually following through in the recovery process. Narcissists can hide it a lot of times from people in support groups, people outside who are just looking in, even the therapist. A lot of times they can hide it there, but the partner sees and knows what's happening. So essentially, the partner has the ability to be that proverbial mirror reflecting back to the narcissist the truth of who they are. Narcissists have a very fragile ego. They don't want to see or admit who they really are. So every time the partner brings up something that happened just to gain clarity or to gain reassurance or to try to understand, because the narcissist has likely changed the story 1,000 times, then the narcissist will get annoyed and say things like, "You were so stuck in the past. Like, you're so unforgiving. I've forgiven myself. You need to forgive me. You just can't move on. You have trust issues. You're just insecure. You're the reason now this relationship isn't working because you can't let it go. My therapist says you shouldn't be asking me things like this." So they're constantly deflecting and putting it back on you. Now, a lot of these statements, even that I went over, fall into the gaslighting category. So I want to go ahead and briefly touch on that because this happens so often. First, I want you to understand what gaslighting is not, because we hear it so often as a buzzword. Gaslighting isn't disagreeing. You can agree to disagree. Both of you recognize that you have different opinions, but you don't feel less than. You don't feel like you're going crazy. You're not incessantly questioning yourself. It's also not seeing the same situation differently. So let's imagine that you and a colleague give a work presentation and you leave thinking it went great because nobody had any questions, which means you explained it so well. That's why nobody had any questions. Your colleague thinks, "Man, it didn't go very well because nobody had any questions," which means we didn't explain it very well and nobody was engaged. You're not blaming or shaming the other. You are just interpreting the same situation differently. With gaslighting, the underlying message is that something is wrong with you. Something is wrong with your sanity, with your competence, with your memory. Gaslighting is attempting to make someone question their reality or sanity. So if you're experiencing gaslighting, you are thinking things like, you're going crazy. You start overthinking everything, ruminating, having more self-doubt, asking yourself, did I say that? Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly? You feel like you and the other person are living in two different realities. Like you just cannot bridge this gap. You get to the point where you feel like you need to, or you do actually start writing things down, recording conversations because you are second guessing and you just want to make sure or see if you really are misremembering because you're doubting your competence, your ability to do things, your mental sanity. And gaslighting is not a one time thing. It's not something somebody does once and then it's like, okay, that's it. It is a process and requires a series of steps. There has to be some form of trust in the relationship. There has to be some form of trust, familiarity, or authority. So people like partners, parents, family, even doctors, therapists have the ability to gaslight you because there's some form of inherent trust in that relationship. There is an aspect of lying, like they are denying reality. They're saying something happened that didn't happen. And a lot of times at that point, you think you're having a misunderstanding. You think, oh, they just didn't remember. Oh, they just forgot we had this conversation. So you'll bring out the text or you'll bring out the email, you'll bring proof, thinking that, okay, this is going to solve this issue. That is what it will move. That's what will make it move to the next step where the narcissist says, something is wrong with you. You're crazy. What kind of person keeps all these text messages? Are you that desperate to have me believe you? Or whatever they say, it becomes about how crazy you are. And the other issue is that gaslighting happens in so many different ways. I'll go over these and then I'll give you common phrases that partners often hear in narcissistic relationships. But they'll do things like ignore your perspective. So when you're talking to a gaslighter over time, you just kind of begin to feel invisible. The narcissist will ignore what you just said, your suggestions, repeat what you just said later, and then say that you never said that. You're thinking to yourself, do I exist here? Like what's happening? Am I invisible or something? They will tell you who you are. Narcissists want to own reality. And most of all, they want to own what you think of yourself. A lot of survivors are just really nice, sympathetic people who will go out of their way to help others. Narcissists will turn that around on you and say, wow, why do you have to make everything about you? Why do you have to be so controlling? Get in everybody's business. So they want you to think that you're someone you're not. Lots of blame shifting, always making something the other person's fault, acting like they didn't hear you. So they might talk to somebody in front of you and then refuse to look at you when you speak, like they're talking to that other person as if you don't exist. You will say something to them, they'll acknowledge you, and then later claim that you never said that and they never heard you. Projection is where a defense mechanism where narcissists don't self-reflect, they project. They say, you're doing whatever they're doing. You catch them in a lie, they say, no, you're a liar. You're selfish. You're cheating. You're doing all the things that they're actually doing. Minimization is where they make light of your emotions and needs or wants. Anything you ask for is too much. Everything that you need is a burden. You're being ridiculous. You're being overdramatic. They question your sanity. These are the phrases that can be especially damaging because they'll frame it in a way where it sounds like they're caring about you. Like, you seem really depressed lately. Maybe you should get some help. Or I think that maybe you got some anxiety. Are you sure you're okay? Are you sure you're doing okay? They're just constantly questioning you as if something is wrong with you. The ultimate end of gaslighting, they want to be the filter through which you see the world. They want to get inside your head because they know that's the most powerful place they can be. And here are some specific common phrases partners hear, and then I'll give you some takeaways and we will wrap up. So I wanted to just go over these, but also kind of frame it in a larger context. What narcissists do that is so harmful to their partners is that they give information in drips. Plus, they change the story along the way, aka they're gaslighting you. Now, I know with the recovery process, ideally there's a formal disclosure process. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and the partner does learn about things slowly over time in drips, and that's really painful. That often adds to more post-traumatic symptoms, more betrayal trauma. But what narcissists do is they tell the partner what happened in drips, even if there is a formal disclosure process. You will think you got it all, you know it all. And then a month later, 6 months later, a year later, you learn something that you didn't know. Because narcissists are telling their partners as little as they think they can get away with. And they're changing the story over time. So where originally it was just one affair partner, now it becomes two. where it was, well, they just kissed this other person. Now they slept with them. And narcissists say these things so nonchalantly, like, I've already told you this, but they haven't. And then they tell the partner, you are crazy. You have such a bad memory. You just won't let things go. You just want to punish me forever. And that is the gaslighting, because they're not just lying, they're lying and telling you or implying there's something wrong with you. So, denial and minimization, they'll say things like, it really wasn't that big of a deal. It was just sex. It wasn't a relationship. I don't know what you're talking about. You're really being over dramatic and too sensitive. The blame shifting and the projection. If you had just done fill in the blank, if you'd just been more attentive, if you'd just done this, then I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. So, really blaming you for what they did. You're so stuck in the past. You just can't move on. You're unforgiving. This is really your fault. You pushed me away. So, narcissists will especially use things like, if, let's say that you had a parent that was really sick, and so you really weren't home as much, or you had something going on with the kids or work, so you really weren't able to be as present in the relationship. And then that's when they had their addiction. They'll basically say, well, this is your fault because you had this going on. And if you would have, been here, then maybe I wouldn't have done that. They'll say that you're just insecure. This is why you're questioning me so much. Like, basically, you need to do your work. Now you're impeding my progress. They'll gaslight to undermine your reality. You're just crazy. That's not how it happened. You're losing your mind. You have a terrible memory. You just twist everything. Everyone thinks you're irrational and unstable. Narcissists often bring in this idea of like, everybody knows this. Everybody thinks this of you. Everybody sees it this way except you. And that's another way they gaslight. My therapist says you shouldn't be asking me things like this. Always be very cautious when a narcissistic person is telling you anything that a therapist says that somebody else says, because it is likely not true or very twisted. They will guilt trip you, lots of victimhood. You're making me feel like a terrible person. I'm trying so hard and I'm doing all the things, but you're just questioning me, and that's why I'm stuck. You're hurting me by not trusting me. So, implying that because they actually need to be the ones to take responsibility to build back that trust, but you're hurting them because you're not trusting them. I'm the one suffering here because I have to deal with all of your accusations. Sorry, guys, for the cats. Um, so, how do you advocate for yourself with a therapist? Let's say you're with a therapist or you are looking for one. What do you need to be doing? Of course, ideally, you find one who specializes in narcissistic abuse, but understandable, that's not always the case. And that's okay. You can still have good therapy without that. Um, I encourage you to ask about credentials and what they mean. I offer all of my new clients a free consult, and they get to ask me whatever they want to. They talk about, or they ask about, what the process is like working with me. Do I have personal experience dealing with narcissists? Why did I get into this? What's my approach like? What are my credentials? So that's something where I would explain that I'm a certified partner trauma therapist and that I work with betrayal trauma and all those things. You can ask them about their credentials. You can ask them, do you have experience working with complex trauma, with narcissistic abuse? Ask them what your approach is like to treating betrayal trauma or working with a betrayed partner when the addicted partner also engages in certain behaviors, like when the addicted partner is also engaging in lots of lying, lots of criticizing, passive aggressiveness, manipulation, put downs. And then overall feeling safe is most important. You can have the most credentialed therapist in the world, but if you get that feeling like you feel worse after talking with them and not better, and you just get that sense in your gut that this isn't the right person, most important to trust that. The second thing is that typically you want to avoid using the term narcissist or narcissism until you hear it from the therapist or until you know that they get it. So you don't want to go in being like, my partner is a narcissist. What are we going to do with that? Just because if they don't understand narcissism, then they may tell you things like, oh, we can't diagnose people that aren't here, even though, I don't, like I said in the beginning, saying someone is a narcissist is a descriptive term, not a diagnosis. But even in training for therapy, we sometimes are told you can't deal with people that aren't in the room, or don't, focus more on the person that's in front of you. That really doesn't apply when you're dealing with narcissists. That's not how I approach therapy in general anyways. But you might get that pushback. So it is helpful just to avoid using that term until you know that the therapist gets it. So what you can do instead is focus on describing behaviors and your symptoms. So instead of saying, I'm being gaslighted, you say, when we talk, the facts are always changing. It's like we can't ever have a conversation and it stick because when I come back to it, they said, no, they didn't say that, even if I show them proof. Or I have to write down conversations or record them because my memory is just constantly questioned. So I'm having to do a lot of work just to make sure we're on the same page with the facts because it seems like that the facts are always changing. Instead of saying the term narcissist or narcissism, you can use all the terms like I described on the initial slide of all those different patterns of narcissism. You can say there's a pattern of really extreme selfishness and a lack of accountability. There are lots of double standards in our relationships. There's lots of times when rules apply to him, but they don't apply to me. Or when I do the same thing, it's not okay, but when he does it, it's okay. So you can explain the behaviors, you can explain your symptoms, how you're experiencing the relationship, rather than using those terms. I say, just as a way to remember it, don't label people, list patterns. So that way you can't be accused of labeling because you're not using the label, you're describing the patterns in the relationship. Just a few key takeaways, just how nuanced this conversation can be. Because, like I said, any sex addict untreated with an untreated sex addiction can look like they have narcissistic traits, but those behaviors are being fueled by an untreated addiction. Once the addiction is addressed, what looks like narcissism goes away. With a true narcissist, those behaviors, those antagonistic symptoms are going to get worse. They're going to be more irritable and more emotionally dysregulated. Um, Something else to keep in mind is that for a narcissist, the patterns are pervasive. They show up in all kinds of different facets of their life. They're not just entitled about the treatment process, they're entitled about work. They believe they should get preferential treatment. They believe that their needs should always take precedence over yours. If they're a vulnerable narcissist, they're going to come to resent the people that are trying to keep them accountable. If they're grandiose, more narcissist, more on the grandiose side, they will assert that they're really better at everybody than this recovery, or they're better than everybody else at this recovery process, and they really just don't need help anymore. So you see these narcissistic patterns in the way they move about the world in general, not just in the recovery process. Um, see, because I want to be mindful of our time. As I said, it's important if you're a betrayed partner, you trust your gut. You're getting both a front row seat and a backstage look at what's going on. So if you're confused, if you feel like, your therapist isn't getting it, you're being harmed in couples therapy, you feel a lot of fear, a lot of obligation, a lot of guilt, take time away. The recovery process for both the addict and the partner can be good in the sense that hopefully you have a lot of different people that are helping you. It can be great to have that support team, but it can also be really chaotic and it can feel like just so much is going on. And our gut, we have a hard time hearing our gut in such a crowded space. So I encourage you to journal, take all the thoughts, put them on paper, spend some time away, like get in tune with your gut, with your intuition. In the chaos of the recovery, it can be really overwhelming. It can be really hard to know what you're seeing and listen to your voice, but our gut is often quiet. So sometimes we've got to get away in order to hear it. So I'm happy to answer questions. This is a QR code to get the first
Great.
chapter of my
Oh,
book free.
excellent. Yeah. I just put
Um,
it in the chat too, but
yeah,
great.
thank you. But yeah, happy to answer any questions and hope that that
Yes.
overview was
So
helpful.
so you can follow along if you click on the Q&A at the bottom. I'm going to read them, but you'll be
Okay.
able to see them as well. So the first question is, isn't narcissism a spectrum and prevalent in both romantic partners in degrees? If substituted with the word ego, choosing narcissism is just as unhealthy and self-destructive in consenting adults.
Narcissism is on a spectrum. Not everybody is a narcissist. I think there's a whole conversation we could have about why we end up in narcissistic relationships. Uh, it's yeah, that's a bigger topic than we have time for, but anybody can get in a narcissistic relationship. It is important to be mindful of those who stay. So like in my book and in therapy, I will talk about what your early childhood experiences, attachment wounds, relational styles. How do you typically try to feel safe in relationships? Do you try to people please or fawn? Or a lot of times survivors are just really agreeable and really nice and they assume the best and they assume that this narcissist is kind of like them. They're just having a misunderstanding, but of course they want what's best. Narcissists think and act in the world fundamentally differently. So it's important you recognize narcissists don't see relationships as opportunities for connection, they see them as opportunities for control. They see people as possessions and products, not as a way to connect. So the person you're dealing with is very different. We can't assume our positive traits on them.
I'm going to just pick at this a little bit because I'm like,
Yeah.
is it typical? I would have a hard time believing that two narcissists could be really in a relationship.
It can happen, not as much, but it can happen if both of them are meeting each other's supply needs. Like think about
Mm,
people who are both got lots of power and prestige and they really like how they look as a couple, then that
okay,
relationship can work. But
okay.
overall, yeah, narcissists need somebody else to offload their distress, and they're very emotionally dysregulated and they want somebody to control and dominate. So, yeah, a lot of times they get with a very agreeable person because of that.
That's what I was thinking. Thanks you. Thank you
Yeah.
on that. Okay. What's the name for the ongoing conversation that starts at the beginning each time? You think that you've reached a point of mutual understanding on an issue, then days later have to relitigate it. It's exhausting, but I don't know what to call it.
I don't know if there's a specific name for it, but it is crazy making is what most people call it. I think I would probably put a title on it of DARVO, and that is a gaslighting technique. And it's an acronym that stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender role. So these are the kinds of conversations where you you end up leaving the conversation feeling more confused than when you started it, or you leave apologizing, or you leave going, what in the world just happened? Like that's what's so hard about conversations with narcissists when you're being gaslighted is they don't make sense. And when things don't make sense, it's hard for our brain to have anything to grasp and hold on to. So then you are just kind of lost in the crazy making. So then you go back to try to make sense of it again. But you have to realize that when you're dealing with a narcissist, you're not having a genuine conversation. You're not even talking about the problem at hand. You are dealing with their manipulation. You are dealing with their gaslighting. So they want, if you solve that problem, they're going to create a new problem because it was never about that problem. It was about what they wanted from you at the time. Did they want to feel powerful? Did they want to feel entitled? That's what you're dealing with. So that is why these conversations are absolutely exhausting.
Yeah, and Chelsea's book talks about boundaries too. But we have a
Yeah.
work group that Debbie McCrae is excellent at healthy boundaries. But you already know the pattern, so instead of starting like it's going to happen, so disengaging, holding your healthy boundaries, getting professional help, as necessary. But yeah, like that's, I call it the negative two step. You do this, I do this, you do this, I do
Mm,
this. And no, until someone changes the choreography, and guess what? It isn't going to be the narcissist. Nothing changes. So, okay, I'm the betrayed partner. This sounds very confusing to me. I I just can't make out if my husband is a narcissist or not. I'm so confused. He is a people pleaser who is in deep depression. He knows what he did, but says he just can't look at the man he has been in our relationship over the past 15 years. He hates himself. He feels violated by his affair, even if he sees that he could have chosen to say no, but he really felt that he couldn't at that point. But he sees it now. Hope that made
mhm.
sense.
Mhm. So I would be interested to see in a situation like that how much he is willing to change with treatment. So a lot of times, especially vulnerable narcissism looks like depression. And a lot of therapists initially treat vulnerable narcissism for depression because that is what they look like. Very victimized, very wounded, very hypersensitive to criticism. But depression with appropriate treatment, with a combination often of medication and therapy and like coping skills and health wise can improve, but with vulnerable narcissism, it looks like depression does not get better. So I would be really interested to see if he is responding to treatment, if what looks like depression gets better, and how much space he is willing to hold for you? Like, is he willing to be held accountable? Is he willing to take responsibility? Or is it just this constant victimized mentality where you don't even feel like that you can express your hurts or express how things have impacted you because he's just so wounded? Because in recovery, ideally, like the addict, and I know like for you guys at the treatment center, you teach that you have to hold that for the partner as the addict. Like you did this, like you do have amends to make. And so that has to be addressed. So that's I would be curious how he responds to that. If he's able to hold space for the betrayed partner, is he just making it all about himself?
And a little bit of this is, where are you? And, if this is just really
Yeah.
recent, like recovery, we did a whole webinar on real recovery, and it takes 2 to 5 years. So if you're in, if you're doing the work, if you're just sitting there feeling shameful and deflecting and being defensive, that's not doing the work. And absence is just not acting out. It isn't recovery. So
Hmm.
there's a whole lot of layers on this. So if this is very early in the process, that is different, and you're going to not see the changes that recovery, if you're actively working a recovery program, getting the help, that those can bring. So, and I love that Chelsey talked about, look at the patterns, not the labels, because as she indicated, all of these labels get thrown around a lot, and everybody's quick to go, oh, this person is this or whatever, so and that can, if it's not an accurate diagnosis, then guess what? The treatment won't be accurate as well.
Hmm.
So it's, what are the patterns? And is this person with help? Are they leaning into getting help? And if they're getting help, are things changing? But I love that you also said, if they say, my therapist said, I always go, if you didn't hear it directly from the therapist, then
Yeah.
these are the called lying lips, so
Yeah.
yeah. So okay. Um, Okay. And I did put, we have a residential treatment program, 14, 21, or 28-day length of stay. He would not be a 14-day, he's probably a 21-day, but
Hmm.
getting life-changing help, it's not just for him, but it would help you as well. So, okay. Does the drip mean that they are narcissists? He doesn't blame me, not to my face anyway. He victimizes himself when I show my emotions and talk about the affair. Is it narcissism, or is it shame and depression? I find it difficult navigating his depression.
Yeah, so similar response. I think that you could, again, I don't know where you are in the recovery. It is important when you start learning about narcissism that we don't get hung up on one thing. Because I get these questions sometimes like, well, if he does this, does that mean he's a narcissist? And that's why I'm like, well, we have to back out and look at the whole pattern. And you're not going to see this just in relation to the recovery or treatment process. So how does he show up with other people? Do you see this kind of victimized mindset of like, even at work, the world is out to get me, life is unfair, people like don't treat me fairly, I could have gotten so much more if my boss would have just recognized my talents, like my family has never supported me the way they should have. There'll be these kinds of there'll be this victimized mindset throughout their life, not just about the recovery. So we really do have to zoom out and look at narcissism as a whole. If we start going, oh, does this mean they're a narcissist? Does this mean they're a narcissist? That's a little tricky because it's kind of like, well, I get disorganized sometimes. Do I have ADHD? Well, we got to back out and look at like it as a whole. And so that's what I would encourage you to do with narcissism as well.
Okay. And um, so the next one is, betrayed wife here. My husband has many narcissistic traits, and I'm lost in how to get him to see this reality. He grasped he is deeply selfish, and maybe almost that he gaslit me. I am struggling with how to support him to accept this and seek help for these core problematic traits. What advice can you give about how to nudge him toward this reality, and maybe one day see him seek the right kind of therapist? I'm truly lost in how to deal with this. This is another one that we don't know where they are on the spectrum. I did put
Yeah.
that this video will be posted later today. So maybe it's like, hey, there's some interesting information. So, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I know this hurts my heart. I know that I can tell from this question, she just so wants him to get help. And I think it is important to set realistic expectations to know that, I mean, I hear this and I get this, but this isn't you. I think we have to be very mindful of what you can and can't do. Because I see, like, how do I get him to see this reality? There's nothing you can do to get him to see this reality. If he wants to see this reality and get help, if he wants to save the marriage, if he wants to have better relationships with you, if there's kids, whatever, that will motivate him. And I would encourage you to focus more on what you as the betrayed partner are and are not willing to deal with in the marriage. Like, not as a what's the word? Like an ultimatum, but like, hey, here's what I need in this marriage. And then like kind of give him that. Like, how can we work toward this? Here's what I'm gonna do. And now I would like encourage or suggest him to get in treatment with somebody who specializes in treating narcissism or obviously treating sex addiction, but spend more of your time invested in getting your standards and your boundaries in place. Ultimately, then if he wants to get help and if he's going to be motivated to, he will, but you trying to continually help him and push. And I speak from this with experience. Like, I did all the things, and ultimately that just got him, he just resented me for it. So you're gonna, you're gonna have a better ROI for your time if you invest in what you can do, and then let him know, here's my standards and here's what I can deal with and what I can't deal with. And then he's gonna have to take ownership and accountability if he's willing to um, be able to to match up to those standards, like rise to the challenge, I guess.
And then somebody's asking about the slides.
Mm.
Are you willing to share those?
Yeah, I could probably give those. And then of course,
We,
with the
you
portal
can
as
either
well.
type your email address in the chat, or
Okay.
people know mine. And if you want to send them to me, mine is Tammy, Tami at seekingintegrity.com. I'm happy to be the go-between, but however that works out. So I
Hmm.
also took some screenshots along the way because I was like, I need that one. I need that one. So,
Yeah.
okay. Let's see. Um, can you speak to separating and divorce in covert passive aggressive narcissists while having children?
Mm, that is a that is a tough one. I think that the biggest thing that stands out there is because I know a lot of times people are worried about what impact this is going to have on the kids. Obviously, not only the divorce, but just a narcissist and all things that go with that. Remember that one healthy parent makes a difference. There is research on not perfect parenting, good enough parenting. And you don't have to have both people on that. One healthy parent can make a huge difference. So remember that with children, with parenting, you're planting seeds. You are you being there, you being attentive to their needs, checking in with the kids. How is this going for you? What emotions are coming up? Getting them into therapy if you're able to, giving them a space where they can just openly talk about what's going on. A- And just being that parent who's willing to be there, willing to help them regulate, be consistent. If we're all human. If you make a mistake, if you do something or say something you think you shouldn't have, go back, be able to say, hey, I'm thinking about that. That was probably hurtful. Here's the better way that I should say that. Those kinds of things will make a difference over time because we know the narcissist is not going to do those things.
And we'll probably blame shift to you anyway. So,
Yeah.
and I am heartbroken. I was like, my neck is getting sore from, I feel like a bobblehead because I've been, bobbing my head along with everything you've
Yeah.
been saying. So I'm going to, on camera, ask you to come back. I will send you some
Oh, thank
options, but I
you.
hope you'll come back
Yeah.
because there's a lot more questions that we're not going to have time to get to. And I just know that there's so much more depth that we can go into with this. So, thank you. She's going to do
Yeah.
a podcast with Dr. Rob too, so that will be forthcoming, but probably not for a bit. But thank you for your time today. This is amazing and so helpful. If you haven't taken the QR of the book, please do it. Get the book. There's lots more in there too. So
Yeah.
great job. Thanks,
Happy,
Chelsea.
happy to
Thanks
do it.
everyone for the questions. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.